North Africa, 1943. The air trembles with the rhythm of machine gun bursts and the hiss of burning sand. In the chaos near Tunisia, a young American soldier collapses under the scream of an MG-42. German officers move cautiously through the aftermath. One kneels beside the fallen man, expecting death. Then something strange. The man is still breathing. His helmet lies dented beside him, a single bullet lodged inside the steel, crushed like a seed that never sprouted. The officer lifts it, brushing away sand, staring at the warped metal that refused to yield. His words come out low, almost reverent. Even their helmets refuse to die. That moment spreads like an unspoken rumor among the soldiers. A rumor not of fear, but of disbelief. In a war measured by tons of bombs and lines on maps, the revelation hides in one small curve of steel. It isn't just equipment. It's a philosophy. Protect the living at all costs. The Germans had built for intimidation, but the Americans, it seemed, had built for survival. In the distance, the sound of engines fades beneath the wind. A thought lingers in the officer's mind. Perhaps the difference between victory and ruin isn't the size of a tank, but the shape of a helmet. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us your city and time. Chartres, France. Inside a dim storage depot stacked with captured Allied gear, German engineers catalog the spoils of war. Among them rests an unfamiliar shape, the American M1 helmet. Its green surface bears scratches, dust, and the faint scent of oil and sweat. One officer lifts it, surprised by its weight. He sets it on the scale, 1.4 kilograms. Too heavy for comfort, he mutters in clipped German. Across the room, a captured American officer overhears. His uniform is torn, his pride intact. Calmly, he replies, "We carry weight, so they carry home." The sentence lands like artillery in silence. No one moves. Even the ceiling fan seems to pause. The German engineer lowers his eyes, realizing that the American wasn't speaking of burden, but of purpose. That moment divides the room. One side obsessed with efficiency, the other with meaning. The M1 helmet suddenly feels less like steel and more like an oath, a quiet promise that every ounce of metal equals a chance at survival. One engineer scribbles in his notebook, calculating thickness and curvature, but his hands tremble slightly. Numbers can't measure what he just heard. Later that night, he notes in his log, their design philosophy carries emotion, not only logic. He doesn't know this entry will be confiscated, translated, and filed in Washington after the war. For now, it sits between two truths: weight as discomfort and weight as devotion. Beyond the depot, the bells of Chartres Cathedral toll across the valley. Men built for conquest stand surrounded by steel designed for mercy. It's a quiet, almost sacred contrast, one that turns a helmet into a question. How much is a life supposed to weigh? Normandy, July 1944. Among thousands of reports flooding the German command, one slim folder stands out. Typed on a smudged underwood typewriter, it reads, "Field report. Enemy head injuries reduced dramatically. Helmet deformation without penetration." The officer reviewing it frowns, adding a note in the margin. Coincidence? The report's author, a weary observer stationed near St. Lo, replies in pencil beneath it. Just one word: design. At first glance, the claim seems absurd. How could a piece of pressed steel tip the balance of survival in a war of tanks and bombers? Yet the data tells its own story. In June alone, dozens of captured M1 helmets were examined, dented, cracked, but unpierced. The skulls beneath them had survived the unspeakable. Cut to Pittsburgh, rivers glowing orange with molten fire, bridges trembling under freight trains hauling manganese steel. Inside the Carnegie, Illinois mills, American workers slice thick sheets, stamping out perfect arcs. The air smells of oil, smoke, and hope. No slogans, no speeches, just repetition, precision, and faith that every curve will matter. They didn't forge metal, the narrator murmurs. They forged chances. Each helmet undergoes the same ritual: 12 gauges of inspection, tempering at 1 through 500 degrees, then quenching to seal resilience inside the steel. Over 22 million M1 helmets will roll out between 1941 and 1945, each one identical in form, yet carrying 1,000 stories. On the other side of the ocean, German officers analyzed their own designs. The classic Stahl helm, heavier and deeper, was made to deflect shrapnel, not to absorb impact. Its silhouette inspired fear, but the American shape preserved faces. Inside Camp McCain, Mississippi, captured engineers stare at recovered helmets displayed like trophies in a technical briefing. One of them, Oberleutnant Franz Keller, whispers to another, "They understood the brain as a weapon to protect." No one replies. They all sense the shift. War was evolving from conquest to preservation. As the projector hums and the lights dim, a slide appears, side-by-side X-rays of injuries. The German skull fractured under impact, the American skull only bruised. A statistic fades in on screen. Fatal head wounds reduced by 71% since 1918. Silence follows. The audience, both guards and prisoners, realize they are witnessing the anatomy of compassion disguised as engineering. Outside, a train whistle echoes through the humid night. Somewhere in the distance, men are still dying. But in that dim hall, surrounded by blueprints and disbelief, something has shifted in the minds of those who once believed only in domination. They begin to understand that even a helmet, forged in fire, worn in fear, can become a moral statement about what a nation values most. Late 1944. A German field hospital outside Aachen trembles under distant artillery. Inside a tent lined with canvas and fatigue, Dr. Wilhelm Kruger, a battle-hardened surgeon of the Wehrmacht, leans over a motionless American prisoner. The man's helmet lies beside him, its olive paint scorched, a bullet groove sliced deep along the rim. Beneath it, a shallow wound. The skin split, but the skull intact. Kruger shakes his head. "It should have killed him," he mutters, tracing the dent with a gloved finger. The young nurse beside him, exhausted and pale, looks confused. "So, why didn't it?" The doctor hesitates. For years, he has treated German soldiers with devastating cranial injuries, many caused by ricochets, by helmets that cracked instead of flexing. He stares at the American helmet again, eyes narrowing. "Maybe," he whispers, "they value a head more than we do." Outside, stretcher bearers move like ghosts through the mud. Inside, the silence feels heavier than the shelling. Kruger scribbles in his diary that night, a confession more than a record. "We perfect the art of killing, and they perfect the art of not dying." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, U.S. Army doctors compile data from field hospitals. They find that 22% of head wounds in World War I were fatal, but under the M1's protection, that figure has dropped below 6%. Numbers that once belonged to laboratories now carry human faces. Men like Private John Ferris, who returns home with a scar and a dented helmet hung over his fireplace, calling it "my second skull." In captured correspondence later analyzed by Allied intelligence, fragments of Kruger's notes resurface. His handwriting trembles where he wrote, "They treat survival as an achievement, not a delay of death." The irony is unbearable. A man sworn to heal, trapped in a system that glorified sacrifice over life. As the front collapses, Kruger operates by candlelight, patching soldiers who will fight again tomorrow. But his eyes keep drifting to the M1 helmet resting in the corner, its dull green surface reflecting the faint glow of the flame. For the first time, he begins to envy his enemy. Not for their weapons, but for their mercy. Outside, the guns thunder on. Inside, a doctor realizes too late that compassion was the strongest armor of all. Detroit, Michigan. The winter of 1944 presses against the factory windows, but the McCord radiator plant never sleeps. Rows of presses thunder like heartbeats, stamping out thousands of M1 helmets each day. Sparks rain down on the concrete floor where women in headscarves, sleeves rolled, guide glowing metal into curved molds. There are no soldiers here, only mothers, sisters, wives. And yet, each strike of the press feels like a battle cry. Amid the rhythmic noise, a woman named Eleanor Harper wipes sweat from her forehead and scribbles a letter to her son, stationed in Belgium. "I'm not building helmets," she writes. "I'm building chances to come home." The paper absorbs a tear before she folds it into her lunchbox. Outside the plant, a snowstorm begins, but inside, the air burns with purpose. By March 1945, this single plant has produced over 3 million helmets. Nationwide, America's industrial network delivers 22 million, enough for every soldier, sailor, and Marine to have one and a spare. Detroit alone, once the city of cars, has become the forge of life itself. Ford's Rouge plant, Chrysler's Arsenal, and McCord's endless shifts merge into one heartbeat. The sound of a nation that refused to rest until its sons were safe. Years later, captured German officers tour the plant as part of post-war industrial studies. They walk through silent halls filled with dormant machines. On the wall, they find Eleanor's letter, framed by workers who refuse to forget her words. One officer, Oberst Hans Reinecke, whispers to himself, "So that's why they fought like they'd return." His translator looks at him strangely, but he doesn't explain. In that moment, the helmet becomes something more than a military artifact. It becomes a symbol of belief, that a nation can fight with compassion without losing its strength. The steel carried fingerprints of welders, the scent of machine oil, the hum of swing music played over factory radios at midnight. Each dented dome that reached the front carried invisible signatures of those who forged it with hope, not hatred. The war taught many to destroy, but in Detroit, thousands learned how to protect. Their production lines were hymns of endurance, sung in the language of clanging steel. They didn't know the names of the men they were saving. They only knew that survival was something worth mass-producing. As the camera pans across the empty factory floor, faint echoes of hammer strikes still seem to hang in the air. Proof that even in war, there were places where creation triumphed over despair. Spring, 1945. The war is gasping toward its end. In a prisoner of war camp near Oklahoma, wooden barracks creak under the prairie wind. Among the German captives sits Lieutenant Friedrich Adler, once an artillery officer in North Africa. His right arm bears a long scar, a gift from shrapnel that missed his skull by inches. He spends most days sketching mechanical diagrams on scraps of paper, trying to forget both the desert and defeat. One afternoon, a young American lieutenant named Thomas Caldwell enters the camp's infirmary. His head is wrapped in bandages, his gait uneven. In his hand, he carries a dented M1 helmet, its rim peeled open like a broken flower. He looks at Adler, then places the helmet on the table. "Keep it," he says quietly. "It saved me twice." Adler hesitates, unsure if this is pity or a gesture of strange fellowship. The helmet feels heavier than it looks. When he tries it on, it doesn't fit perfectly, yet something about its balance, its calm solidity, stirs him. "Strange," he murmurs. "It feels alive." Caldwell nods, almost smiling. Maybe because someone believed it should. Then he leaves, leaving the German officer with the relic of survival. That night, Adler writes in his hidden notebook, "We built weapons to end lives. They built tools to keep them." He hides the helmet beneath his bunk, polishing it as if it were sacred. Among his fellow prisoners, rumors spread. The American gave his helmet to an enemy. Some laugh, others fall silent. But none can explain why. When Adler walks across the yard the next morning wearing it, the guards don't stop him. Perhaps even they understand. Years later, Adler would bring that same helmet back to Hamburg. He never spoke publicly about the war, but his son remembered the object on the shelf, green, scarred, and impossibly human. When asked what it was, Adler simply said, "The reason I'm still here." It's easy to imagine that moment of exchange in that quiet Oklahoma camp as something far greater than charity. Two enemies connected not by politics, but by survival. Two men recognizing that steel could carry something softer than hate. The camera lingers on the helmet resting on a table, a patch of sunlight glinting off the bullet scar. For a brief second, the viewer can almost feel it breathing, as if remembering the heads it once protected and the lives it quietly refused to surrender. What would you have done in his place? Would you have given it away, or kept it as a reminder that mercy, too, can be armor? Normandy, 1962. The fields have healed, but the earth still keeps secrets. Beneath the gentle hum of bees and the sway of tall grass, traces of the invasion sleep, rusted metal, empty casings, forgotten names. On a mild spring afternoon, a French boy named Luc Martin wanders near the hedgerows with a stick and an old curiosity for war relics. His grandfather once told him, "The soil remembers everything." Then Luke sees it, half buried, its surface glinting under the sun. He kneels, brushes away the dirt, and lifts an M1 helmet, rusted and dented, yet unmistakably proud. Inside the rim, scratched by hand and faded by time, are 6 words. "If this saves me, let it rest." The boy reads them aloud softly, though he doesn't understand who wrote them or why. He brings it to his grandfather, a man who lived through the occupation. The old man studies it for a long moment, his fingers tracing the engraving. "This one kept someone alive," he says, "so it deserves peace." He places the helmet back on the ground, as if returning it to its home. The camera lingers on the scene, the boy's reflection in the curved steel, the sunlight filling the dent where a bullet once struck. Around them, the landscape is quiet, the kind of silence earned only after too much noise. In that stillness, the war feels both far away and suddenly close again. The M1, once an object of war, now lies as a relic of mercy. The boy tilts his head and asks, "Grand-père, was it American?" The old man smiles faintly. "Maybe, but today it belongs to everyone who ever wanted to live." A gentle wind passes through the grass, bending the blades like waves. No music plays, only the rustle of the wind and distant crows circling the horizon. The camera begins to pull back slowly until the field becomes an ocean of green. And in that silence, one final thought lingers, that some inventions end wars, while others remind us why we should never begin them. The helmet rests beneath the sun, half in shadow, half in light, a monument not to victory, but to survival itself. Decades have passed, but the M1 helmet still whispers across history, not as a weapon, but as a witness. It has seen men crawl through fire and mud, survive the impossible, and walk away with the sound of bullets echoing in their skulls. It was born from science, yet became something spiritual, an emblem of a nation that believed survival itself was worth engineering. In Tunisia, it defied a German bullet. In Chartres, it weighed more than a man's doubt. In Normandy, it turned data into compassion. In a tent near Aachen, it made a doctor question his own faith in sacrifice. In Detroit, it was molded by hands that loved more than they feared. In Oklahoma, it became a bridge between enemies. And in that quiet French field, it finally found rest, as if the world had exhaled after holding its breath for 20 years. Numbers tell one story. Over 22 million M1 helmets produced, more than 70% fewer fatal head wounds than in the last war. But behind those numbers are faces, engineers who drew perfect curves, workers who signed each piece with sweat, soldiers who touched the rim before battle and whispered a small prayer. There's a reason veterans rarely threw theirs away. For many, the M1 was not equipment. It was memory made tangible, the hum of the factory, the weight of fear, the warmth of survival. A piece of steel that carried a heartbeat. Sometimes, when an old soldier in a nursing home lifts that faded green shell and runs his fingers along the dent that saved him, you can see the past return. His eyes soften, and for a moment he's back in the field, alive again, because something human hid inside cold metal. History often remembers destruction, but perhaps the truest measure of civilization lies not in what we build to kill, but in what we build to protect.